Good morning, Michael Strong. How are you?
I'm very well, Mark. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Not too bad. Recording this, I'm on the move at the moment. I'm recording this from a hotel room, so I don't have my usual fancy green screen background today.
Well, that works. I'm actually in my home, so it works.
So thank you for taking the time to be with the Neo audience today. I know that it's, was it 10 a.m. where you are now?
It is. It is. I'm in Austin, Texas.
Right. Okay. So we are really keen to find out more about the work you do at the Socratic experience, which I've only recently come across. And the more I look at it, the more I think, you know, there's just it doesn't satiate my need to know more when I'm looking at the website. And it's great to actually have time to sit down and chat to you about all the background and how it came to be. So would you just, for our listeners, just give us a bit of an idea about what the Socratic experience is, just in a nutshell, and then we can go into a bit of detail.
Sure. So I always tell my students I love learning and I hate school, which is a little bit unusual for someone who creates schools for a living. But we are very focused on intellectual dialogue. We can dig into the adjective Socratic, but really thinking and talking about ideas. And it turns out kids love to think and talk about ideas. I think they're craving the opportunity to make meaning of their lives. Sometimes I describe our secondary program as the conscious development of personal identity, which sounds like a mouthful, but our whole goal is to help kids think and understand the world. And of course, we have math and science and all of that sort of thing. But I would say the core experience is to help them discover the true, the good, and the beautiful or the noble within themselves. And then that leads to a purpose-driven life. So lots of bells and whistles around that, but I'll pause for that for now.
Well, as you say, I mean, there's a lot in there, and it's music to my ears to think about, purposeful life, because it's something that I feel like there are several sort of lost generations to this who, we've got these phrases that we hear, things like, midlife crisis and all these things that I wonder how much of this is actually completely preventable if people are actually supported to find out who they are and what makes them tick or what they're passionate about a little bit earlier. So in terms of your experiences in education prior to this, or in life in general, can you take us through a little bit how you arrived at this model? I mean, you must have obviously ruled several things out before getting here.
So it goes way back. And when I was in high school, I had a teacher where all we would do is we would read philosophy. We'd read Plato or Buber or Nietzsche and then just talk about it. And I loved it. It was kind of my first introduction to intellectual dialogue. My parents were uneducated. My mom was a high school dropout. My dad was an elevator repairman. And all of schooling, I was good at school. I describe it as memorize and forget tests. I could load it up into the brain, spit it out, get an A, and walk out, and it was gone. But intellectual dialogue, where we could really think about things, was totally different for me. So I think of it as, some films go from black and white to color. So for me, that was when my life went from black and white to color, and vibrant, alive. So I actually, there's a college called St. John's College, campuses in Annapolis, Maryland, and Santa Fe, New Mexico. I was going to drop out of high school and go there directly, but I had good test scores, and so my college counselors encouraged me to go to Harvard. Went to Harvard for a year and was bored because there's still people lecturing at me. I hate being lectured at. So I left Harvard to go to St. John's, which is 4 years of Socratic dialogue. So what's distinctive about that is no lectures for 4 years. All one does is read and discuss classic texts. The original version is Western civilization. They've since done an Eastern civilization and an Islamic classics. So the idea is, not tied to any particular tradition, but doing a deep dive into the intellectual roots of whatever tradition we're examining. And I love that so much. I describe it as, after my wife, the great love of my life. So basically, and this was 30 some years ago, I've been creating programs in schools based on Socratic dialogue for 30 some years. So yeah, it's something I live and breathe. One could describe it as a selfish activity because I love intellectual dialogue so much, and I derive great pleasure from getting kids to think about ideas. I have a YouTube channel, Socratic Michael Strong, where I have a girl that I started with at age 4. Now she's 9. So you can see, now 5 years of Socratic dialogue from a child. And for me, whether it's an adult, an elder, a child, a teenager, it's just the most joy I can find on earth. To think and talk about ideas with people. And so, when I go into classrooms, I used to do this in public schools, it felt like liberating prisoners. Many kids had never had somebody really be interested in what they are interested in. I wrote a book called The Habit of Thought after I went to a classroom, this is high school seniors, and they said they had never been listened to by an adult before. And of course, teenagers can exaggerate it, but still, they said their parents don't listen, teachers don't listen, their bosses don't listen, their priests don't listen, whatever it was, they said, adults don't listen to us. I'm just asking them questions all the time. So it was fun.
It's quite revealing, isn't it? I mean, you say that that might possibly be an exaggeration. I tend to suspect it's probably not. Because if we think about, the education that you went through, which is very much the same as mine, was this kind of empty vessel approach and, passive acquisition and regurgitation. And certain people flourish in that, and I was one of them as well. I did well, but it was set up for people like me, and the rest of them were left at the wayside, unfortunately. So I found that when I studied philosophy, I had a similar experience to you. I studied mental philosophy in university, and it was I felt like I was finally called on some of the things I was saying. I was always articulate, had a way with words, I was always able to kind of come across and make my way through exams and things like that. But in philosophy, you can't hide, and I felt completely seen for the first time, and I felt like there was a real I was supported to really deeply reflect on the why in things, which is such a fascinating experience, because when you're talking about things like purpose-driven life, I mean, that requires a great deal of self-exploration and self-reflection. So the earlier we can get there, the better. So in terms of how that connects, what would you say for people who might wonder what a Socratic experience is? I mean, what are the hallmarks of it
Sure.
in your view?
So in essence, I think we all, some of us more than others, obviously. There's some people that like regular school, and I always have to remind myself of that because I'm so much on the other side. But I think many of us crave conversations about what is true and how do we know it's true. Of course, in an age of social media, epistemology is becoming a mainstream necessity. How do we know it's true? What is good? Especially now that we live in such a radically, multicultural society. Are there any moral norms or no moral norms? I think most people don't want an absolute morality. On the other hand, absolute relativism, nihilism, that doesn't feel right either. In some sense of excellence, in the Greek, kalos could be translated as beautiful or noble, but I think there's a craving in humans for some sense of excellence. And I think that many teens want to know who they are in this world and why. And it's really liberating for them to have, we spend a lot of time. We have text-based dialogue 4 days a week. We also have a personal growth session 4 days a week, which is also dialogue, but more about one's interiority as opposed to a text. And texts are often philosophy, literature, and so forth. But basically, and sometimes we do science Socratics as well. Basically, somewhere between 10 to 15 hours a week of our classes are small groups online. We're 15 to 1, where we read a text together, or again, our interiority, and ask, what do you think? Mark, what do you think and why? Why do you think that? And the adult is not there to tell anyone what to believe. It's just to weave the thoughts together. Well, Mark said that, and Julian said that. How is Julian's thought related to Mark's thought? So I have, as a Socratic leader, I love Socrates as a midwife. I'm very much a midwife, not putting my own ideas on them, but helping them to evolve their ideas. And, it's funny, I think anybody who's really been in a situation where other people care about their beliefs, my YouTube channel is also called Loving Your Child's Mind. I love human beings' minds. And I think for many people, it's such an empowering experience to have not only the adult, but their peers really care about what they think and believe and why. And, you know, some people take to it immediately. Others, you know, I've had students who are silent for a year because they're just in shock. What are we doing? What's going on here? But many of those come back and love it the following year. Because I think, you know, I'm very fascinated with indigenous cultures. I think, you know, in traditional cultures, people would talk, spend evenings talking. And so this notion that human beings need to engage in meaningful conversation is part of our lifeblood. And I think it's missing in modern society for the most part.
It's fascinating. I mean, I'd love to be a fly on the wall in some of these sessions, because as so often happens within these conversations, I listen with a mixture of, you know, admiration and almost wistfulness, you know, because of the fact that so many people out there are not learning like this. They're not exposed to this. And one thing that comes through strongly in what you're saying there is there's a great independence at a much earlier age through this level of inquiry, isn't there? I mean, if you're presenting the teacher, the learning guide, instructor, whatever, you would say, as somebody who's not saying I have all the answers and my interpretation of this situation is the one that you're beholden to. It can be scary because there's a vacuum there, especially at certain ages where people are still maybe looking to exterior laws or guidance from adults, or etc., as to what is right and wrong, and suddenly they're being asked to think about, well, what do you think? I mean, there must be a lot of fear in there, no, to step up and take advantage of that.
Huge. I dedicate my book to The Habit of Thought to independent thinkers everywhere. But to give you some sense of the pushback, when I was doing this in public schools in Alaska 30 years ago now, I had a parent come up to me and she said, "Your questions cause confusion. Confusion comes from Satan. And therefore what you're doing is satanic, and I'm going to get it out of the schools." And, you know, it turns out a small group of activist parents can in fact eliminate something from the schools. So, you know, she got me out of that school district. And one of the reasons I've been in private ever since is I don't want to fight with people who are not ready to think this way. You know, I want to work with people. And it turns out a lot of entrepreneurs and creative professionals are really eager to have their children develop an independent mind.
Yeah.
So there is a constituency for this. And, you know, of course, I love people who are excited about this. But kind of one more nuance going in a different direction, I have been accused of educational malpractice by various people. And just to take one thing, there's a certain professionalization of pedagogy that says every lesson should have clear learning objectives. You know, that's what teaching is. That's what a teaching professional is. By the very nature of this, we have no clear learning objectives. It's develop your thoughts.
Yeah, and that again, that is scary. Much of the way in which education would seem to need to innovate, every way you look at it, it involves letting go. It involves letting go of the need to control and sculpt. Because, I mean, of course, if we're doing that as educators, we are imposing our worldview and the products of our experience on the way that we are carrying out the teaching and learning. And that's obviously pretty risky. I'm thinking particularly about the world that we're in now, this volatile, uncertain, complex world, you know, that's ahead. Climate change, globalization, you know, huge challenges, diversity and inclusion, equity. There's so much out there. So certainly I can see that what you're doing is helping with independent thought, but in terms of other skills that you think might be necessary or desirable or useful for learners who are going out into the world, what would you say, what kind of skills would you say the Socratic experience is helping to develop, and how are you doing it?
No, that's a great question. And I'll kind of go at it somewhat roundabout. First, you know, in terms of letting go, your initial point, I'm sort of in an interesting place where in some ways I'm, you know, close to the frontier of self-directed learning, where we give kids a lot of autonomy. On the other hand, you know, I know people who are committed to self-directed learning and, you know, unschooling and so forth, where they just let kids do whatever they want. And I don't think that's always beneficial, but sometimes it's spectacularly so. I think the difference, I'm very interested in schooling as a set of cultural norms, or learning as a set of cultural norms. And for me, one of the ways that starts in our Socratic discussion is that reason and evidence are the authorities. So, Mark is not the authority, Michael's not the authority, but if we're reading something together, and often kids will say when we're reading a text together, oh, it means whatever you want it to mean. So we might be reading a poem and I'll say, okay, is this a recipe for chicken soup? And they'll say, no, of course it's not a recipe for chicken soup, it's a poem. Okay, then it doesn't mean whatever you want it to mean. And gradually I get them to agree that even though we can disagree on what conclusions, poetry, lots of interpretations, but there are constraints that, words have to mean something, and how we draw conclusions from the words have to fit together somehow. So I would say that part of the culture we're working together to create is a culture where respectful disagreement based on reason and evidence become the norm. And I see that as a microcosm of, oh my gosh, if we could get everybody on social media to engage in respectful and disagreement using reason and evidence, home run. But to go on, into math and science, I would say, we attract maybe 20 to 30% of our kids spontaneously love math and science, but we attract a lot of kids who don't spontaneously love math and science. A lot have had a bad experience with math previously. A lot of them are creatives or humanists where they just don't resonate with it. But by means of engaging with, intellectual dialogue, reason and evidence on text, gradually they sometimes see why math and science become more meaningful. And we do mathematical problem solving and we get them to respect the need for evidence that science, again, science is often memorize and forget, but once they see that no, science really is reason and evidence put together in these extraordinary, edifices of knowledge, then it becomes a more engaging, experience for them. So I would say that's the common theme, whether it's math or science or language arts or history, whatever topics we're covering, is reason and evidence or the authority. To that extent, I'm very much an Enlightenment liberal. Kind of, I believe that the search for the truth collectively will help us advance towards asymptotically towards something that looks a little bit more like truth. Again, all the postmodern quibbles aside, science is real and, some things are wrong.
Yeah, and that seems to be very timely, of course, to be focusing on this. And it seems like an opportunity. I wonder to what extent you're working with this, the application of this to digital and information literacy. I'm thinking about, for example, the program in Finland, which seems to be light years ahead with information literacy and basically mass upskilling of the populace there in terms of how do you spot bias, how do you filter, and how do you spot an agenda, how do you find the truth, how do you reason it out. So it seems like you've got all the ingredients there. Do you go as far as application to these kind of very modern manifestations of the problem?
Occasionally, I would say one of the ways I like to approach that is we like to spend years, give you a little bit of nuance here. Often students may engage in more intimate dialogue initially on mathematics than on love poetry. Likewise, they often engage in reason and evidence on, say, apolitical content before we get to, say, more politicized content. Right. So I like to develop very deep habits of rationality and dialogue and civility. I would say civility is really important because we do want people to be able to disagree on fundamentals. And sometimes we do have students disagree on fundamental worldviews. At one point I had Israeli students and Palestinian students in the same classroom, and an event happened in the Middle East and there was severe, very emotional disagreement. But because we'd had years of kind of habits in terms of civil disagreement, we were able to kind of calm it down. We do sometimes use the techniques of nonviolent communication if things get too hot, and so I want to acknowledge Socratic is not the whole ball game. They're kind of a whole set of I think of them as cousins. They're kind of a family tree of dialogic techniques. And when we get to, say, politicized topics on the internet, like to kind of come from this place of, okay, where can we agree on evidence? Where do we disagree on evidence? What can we respect in the other person's discourse? What can we not respect? So we're kind of building, I see it as building on habits we've done for years. So when we do touch on, contentious internet sorts of issues, we don't, as it were, teach them about bias. We acknowledge everybody has a perspective, but how do we respectfully disagree and use evidence to, the way I would look at it is there is a piece of this disagreement that's due to evidence, and sometimes there are pieces that are due to fundamentally different beliefs. And A religious person who believes that abortion is murder evidence is not going to change their mind. It comes from a different place. And so a lot of this is becoming sophisticated about our own beliefs and where we have certain moral convictions that are not subject to, as it were, rational adjudication, versus where, okay, this part really is an evidence issue, and how do we find evidence we agree on? And again, I'm very constructive, optimistic. Whenever I see a disagreement like this, okay, what can you guys agree on first? And then let's build up. And at some point, okay, we disagree, but at least there's some shared reality. I think one of the biggest issues on the internet is, at this point, people completely lack a shared reality. So rather than have people dismiss something, okay, at what point does the reality start to go in different directions, and why?
And that's a fascinating level of discussion that I think needs to be had as early as possible as well, because it's very pressing and troubling. In all of this, I mean, I know that from speaking to one of your students a few weeks ago, speaking to Raheen, that there was, she was mentioning the transversal nature of the learning. So it's grouped into kind of humanities and sciences. So it's not sort of subjects siloed and separated artificially from each other, which again is something quite fascinating and not the norm. How does that come across to? So we're moving towards a little bit, I guess, how it fits into the framework of the system, because this is the tricky bit for me. Is, I mean, I can understand how all of the things that you're talking about that are like necessary on, say, the SAT test can be developed with this sort of methodology, but with the transversal nature as well, where you're not focusing on subject specific areas as such. How does that work, and how do you link it to them then sitting the SATs?
That's a super good question. So back up a little bit and talk about my college admission strategy, which is US centric. I haven't, I've looked a little bit at, A levels and so forth, but it's US centric. But the colleges in the US will accept students, and this includes the most elite colleges, who have great SAT scores, a few great college courses, and advanced placement AP courses in the US are basically college level courses, and a great project. And to go through each of these, most alternative educators are hostile to testing in general, and the SAT in particular. But I'm a voracious reader. In 6th grade, I was reading a 200-page book every night just because I love reading. My parents would put me to bed and I'd read under the light through the crack of the door. Right in.
And I'm still doing that.
Yeah, exactly. I did great on the SATs because I love reading. And over the years, and I've been administering the SAT 3 times a year in my schools for a decade now. Students who are serious readers typically do well on the SAT verbal, and especially if they read, diverse, complex material. One of the reasons the SAT is regarded as so stressful is if as a senior you take it and you don't like your scores, let's cram and so forth. And cramming is not that effective. The test prep industry is actually not that effective. But simply having a deep engagement with sophisticated texts from an early age, which is what we do in our classrooms, allows us to have SAT verbal scores and gains that are higher than average, because that's what we do. So reading culture, and you can get me into how reading has declined over the decades and everything, but reading can be a joy, and a reading culture is significant. So SAT math is a bit different. Again, many of our students are humanists who don't like the SAT math. Or math in general. So it's a common pattern that I'll have a student who's in 10th grade and their verbal score might be 100, 150 points higher than their math score. And then we say, look, this is the range of colleges you can get into if you raise your math score. This is the range of colleges you'll get into if you don't raise your math score. Totally up to you. So we believe in agency. We're not pushing the students. And some students say, I don't care about it. I'm not going to work on math. Other students like, wow, I want to go there. I'm going to work hard to get my SAT math. And they diligently work hard because they want to for a particular goal, and done. With respect to the college courses, those are more traditional for sure. AP is, there's an AP world history, European history, yada, 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 biology. And those, we recommend they take at least 3 over the course of high school, which doesn't take a lot of time, 1 a year. We encourage them to take a college level course as early as possible. But I think it's good practice to take at least 1 difficult course each year, traditional course. And they find if they have high level reading and math skills and decent habits, and they're doing it because they've chosen it, because they have a destination, they can do that. So that's an explicit concession to, let's prove to colleges you can do a challenging college level course. When they're ready to do it, they do it, and great. And then finally, projects. Every student at our school is expected to have a project that they are driving. It's their passion. We like the purpose diagram, the integration of what do I love, what am I good at, what does the world need, and what will the world pay for as kind of destination. But they get to choose it. And then we have 30 minutes one-on-one mentoring with each student every week. I mentor Raheen, and we coach them on how to build towards a substantial project. And what people don't realize is that colleges love students that have done something really substantial. When I went to Harvard, there was a kid who had low SAT scores, but he had been elected mayor of a small town in Michigan at the age of 18. You can get yourself elected mayor at 18. They don't care about your test scores, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And lots of examples. Kids who write novels, create software companies. I have a kid who is a professional actor who got into Harvard recently, but no traditional education. So there's this, I think, false norm in the US that, oh, I need lots of extracurriculars, varsity sports, student council, volunteer work, yada, yada, yada. They would actually rather see somebody who had a rock star achievement. And if starting young, we get them to develop these projects. A lot of kids do amazing projects. I had a kid who created a 3-day music festival here in Austin. He had bands from around the world, $80,000 budget, was the cool dude in his genre of music, and that helped him get into UT Austin. So, we're very strategic. The SAT, the AP, and their own project gives them lots of autonomy, but also, we're not just sort of saying whatever, we're guiding them towards a destination that's meaningful to them.
I mean, this is fascinating because it's one of the things I was going to ask you was about the experiential part of this, the application part of this, because I would to play devil's advocate, I might be listening here as perhaps a parent thinking about my child attending the school and thinking, well, text-based dialogue, the word Socratic. Isn't it old-fashioned? Are they just debating and discussing all day? Did they actually, get out in the real world, as it were? And of course, what you're saying is that all of this building of these critical reasoning skills, developing empathy for others, soft skills, all that kind of stuff is put to use in the projects, isn't it? So, and it's not these artificially sculpted projects within the safe walls of the school. They're out there. I mean, getting elected mayor and organizing a music festival, which, I mean, what can you say about that?
Well, exactly. And just to connect it to a couple of other things, I've spent most of the last 20 years in Austin and San Francisco, kind of entrepreneurial hotbeds. And it turns out that not only universities, but the work world, especially the 21st century, startup economy, they really value people who take initiative and get things done. They also, by the way, value being an articulate, thoughtful person. So, I can see why people think the Socratic text-based is old-fashioned, but I often say one of the most important skills I ever learned was writing a cold call email. Learning to write an organized, thoughtful, concise communication is incredibly valuable. Years ago, I saw a study that showed that the people who made up more than 100,000, and so long ago, it's probably more than $150,000 a year that now, were especially articulate. So whether you're in medicine or sales or engineering, the person who is articulate and a good writer, great verbal and written communication skills, is going to rise to the top in organizations because we all need effective communicators.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's something that so many institutions fall short on, especially in things like the sciences, where the province of knowledge is deemed as sufficient for certification, but the ability to communicate it, to lead change, to inspire others, or even to help people understand the efficacy or application of the things you're working on are left aside. And it's a real lag in the system. Yeah. So what you're doing is you're changing that round. No, you're starting with that.
Big time. And just to riff on that a little bit, some people do think it's shocking. Our kids spend so much time talking. They spend, years. You talk about, 10,000 hours to world class. They're getting close to 10,000 hours of talking, which, wait, what are they learning? They're not learning. But if you look at adults in the real world, a lot of them with successful adults in our society are talking all the time. They're on the phone, they're giving presentations. This is what successful professionals do. And if you don't practice it, this is where one of my pet peeves are language arts classes, which are lectures. So, you're talking at kids all day and you expect them to develop verbal skills. Wait, what's wrong with this picture?
Oh my goodness, I know. There's so much almost insanity that goes on, and that's a classic example. I mean, in the end, the results will speak for themselves, won't they? And something, just to pick up on something you've said, it seems like we're at an interesting moment where higher education institutions they're getting a bit more flexible. How can you demonstrate to us what you have to offer? That's broadening. Now it's not as rigid as it used to be, and if the computer says no, you don't come in. And to hear you mentioning it, things like if you can demonstrate that you've done X and Y, they're not going to care about your grades, is really how it should be. And certainly companies are light years ahead of that. You go to some of these big tech firms, say in Silicon Valley, I mean, qualifications are certainly not everything. What is learnable and what is not learnable quickly? They're looking for those skills that you're bringing that are adaptable or adaptive to the things they need. So it seems like the Socratic experience is really positioned well to kind of help learners come out with the things that are really important in their life and to help them, take learning forward themselves. And I wonder if you think that this is now something that is replicable, transferable? Is it something that you can infuse into other schools? Is it a movement that you might lead? Where does it go from here?
No, those are great questions. First, just a couple of preliminary riffs on things you mentioned. So one of the things is I am especially interested in alternative post-secondary institutions because, as you say, they're moving this direction anyway, but some are moving faster than others. So in the United States, Olin College of Engineering might be 20 years old now. I think it was started with hundreds of millions, is 100% project-based engineering. And, how relevant to the real world is that?
Yes.
Yes. I'm also very big on design schools. I think design is one of the great liberal arts of the 21st century. And design schools often care more about what you can do than grades and test scores. It's all about performance-based and so forth. So very much looking at, creating an effective pipeline like that. And just quick on learning how to learn. So one thing I find is that if one is empowered to decipher difficult texts, regardless of the text, then one is empowered to learn whatever one wants to. So St. John's tutor in my undergraduate college said the ideal St. John's language exam is one where you don't know what language the exam will be in. It might be in Swahili or Polish or Mandarin, but you're given a lexicon and a grammar and a passage to translate, and you just figure it out. And I generalize that, maybe a science exam, but you don't know what science it is. But if you're sufficiently literate in mathematics and so forth, you have a biology paper or a psychology paper, or within bounds, depends on the mathematics, a physics paper, an economics paper, and you just figure it out. Software, we figure it out. Whatever it is, you figure it out. So I'm very big on the learning to learn piece. Going back to kind of influence on other schools. So certainly, I've done lots of Socratic in-service trainings. I've written a book on that. I would say the one thing that's come to me as most significant is the importance of cultural alignment. I used to do this where we'd go into a school and, in third period, get the kids all thinking and talking. And then in fourth period, it's shut up and do as you're told. I'm a little bit harsh, but, you can see my emotion there. Mm-hmm. Whereas what I'm encouraging a lot of alternative educators to see, and I think Montessori and Waldorf have been brilliant at this for a century, is that a set of norms around what is learning. And, insofar as the standard is, memorize and forget, whatever, clear learning objectives, I'm encouraging alternative educators to see what kind of human excellence are you developing? What kind of pattern of human interaction are you committed to? And then, insofar as inquiry is one of them, let's think through what it looks like to be consistently inquiring in all aspects of what you do. And so for me, it's very much a movement. I'm very supportive of all paths. I'm delighted you guys are into this alternative framework, because I think the standard system is dominant. I think of it as a dominant operating system with market share greater than Microsoft ever had in the 90s. And all the small little ones on the edges where we are, against the wind, facing a headwind. Yeah. I think collectively, there are so many human beings and educators and parents and students who are eager for something different, that I think that we are going to see sort of a phased transition where these innovative models are going to take over increasing amount of market share. And ultimately, my hope is in 20 years, purpose-driven student agency-driven education will be the dominant modality, and gradually the old model. Again, there might be 20 to 30% of the population who love that and stick with it. That's fine, but I'm pretty certain it's not a majority of the population that wants to stay there.
I think I'm always very hesitant to concur with things like that because I'm aware of my echo chamber, painfully so. But I do find that even in sort of mainstream education institutions, that is the narrative. I do see it changing, and I wonder if one of the next steps that the Socratic experience might be able to take is actually to make teacher training more Socratic, because that's where a lot of this comes from. Have you thought about being involved at that level? It seems like you could make a big impact there.
No, absolutely. And we have, an internal teacher training. And by the way, one of the reasons I'm so impressed with Montessori and Waldorf is each of those approaches has had dedicated teacher training, on the order of a century now.
Yeah.
And I think that's the other thing is people interested in alternative schooling. It's so important to have consistent teachers, we call them guides. Whereas often if you have somebody who's 30 years in a regular system, even if they love the idea of a different kind of education, it's hard to change habits. So I'm very involved in teacher training within our program and very interested in supporting teachers outside. I am looking at partnering with with university programs. A lot of this is it needs to be experienced. Just one of my concerns about regular teacher training is PhDs who become a professor of education because they've written research reports, and no matter how valuable the research, right, it's not related to actual real experiential pedagogy. But I'd love to create a substantial university-based program where we have pipelines of Socratic educators coming out.
Yeah, I would love to see that too, because I do think that's what's missing, is really getting back to the why, because I feel like that coming into teacher training, people are getting into it for the right reasons. They're certainly not becoming teachers for financial gain, that's for sure. They're getting into it for altruistic reasons, and that is a great starting point to say, well, how best can you actualize? How best can you serve these learners? How best can you bring that to fruition? It's an amazing point to start at, but unfortunately, it tends to get dampened and under the weight of, learning myths and neuro myths and research-driven stuff that maybe doesn't take into account the full spectrum of learning. And I like the whole Socratic thing because it's much more, there's a playfulness to it. There's some teasing of the inquiry there. It's open-ended. It's human essentially. I would love to see that be the norm, actually.
No, absolutely. Just a couple of things there. First, although of course people always talk about, dead white European males and old texts and everything, I would say Plato, it's a delight to introduce many students to Plato in particular, because Socrates is intellectually playful. And many students have never run into the category of intellectual playfulness their entire life.
Yeah.
And so to see, what is he doing? And do we like him? Do we not like him? Is he a jerk? Is he interesting? There's a whole kind of, quite aside from the intellectual side, there is this social interpersonal dynamic that certainly fascinates many students. And you can see how he corrupted the young, because they see somebody kind of playing around with the questioning and, wow, let's do this. The other thing is I see educating, and certainly, the Socratic work we do is a performance art. And so another way to think about this is, suppose we wanted to have, great singers, and we trained those great singers not by singing, but by means of writing research papers on musicology. Would Adele have ever become Adele if all she did was write papers? Right,
Yeah, I highly doubt it. I highly doubt it. Yeah. I would love to see this. I mean, I wonder, is there how can we what's the closest we can get to experiencing what you do there from the outside?
So I do recommend my YouTube channel, Socratic Michael Strong, and you'll see with young children. We actually recently we did one on mind maps, mental models. And we did a little discussion on the map is not the territory. This is with 8, 9, 10-year-olds. And it's fascinating to see these, children think through, what does it mean to say the map is not the territory? So I really enjoy it. I would encourage interested listeners to go check out Socratic Michael Strong on my YouTube channel. And then I also have the book, The Habit of Thought, From Socratic Seminars to Socratic Practice, which was designed for teachers, by the way. I wrote it because I was giving in-service trainings to teachers, and there was nothing out there that really kind of talked about, what we were trying to do. Amazon might charge you more, but you can contact me and I will sell you a signed copy of The Habit of Thought if people are interested.
Well, I'm going to do that, actually. Consider me, put me on your order list, and I'm off now to this to the YouTube channel. I know you've got another call pressing in on you, but I'd love to talk again, Michael, because I felt like there's so much more to explore, particularly around the influence of Socrates in particular.
Well, I was going to say, knowing that you have a philosophy background, now I see why you get this. Yeah, we can go very deeply on that. And again, I see Socratic as the mutual expectation that we have consistent, coherent beliefs. Huge amount packed into that. But as a philosopher, you can see how I love the quotation. Alfred North Whitehead once said, "All of Western philosophy may be seen as a series of footnotes to Plato." Yeah. I think of all of Western intellectual life may be seen as a follow-through on the model of Socrates. Do we have consistent, coherent beliefs? Why or why not? Let's ask each other, unpack it.
Yeah, and that's it in a nutshell. Yeah. Well, I'm really looking forward to seeing how that plays out in action on the YouTube channel. And it's the SocraticExperience.com is the school, isn't it?
That's correct. That's correct. Yeah. And we are a virtual school, so we do have some European families. So it's a little bit later day, but we're based in the US, but we have families from around the world and would love to have more.
Great. Okay. Well, we'll make sure we get the word out, because I think what you're doing is fascinating. Absolutely fascinating, and I feel like there's a lot more to know. So it'd be great if we could meet up again at some other point in the future and dig a little deeper into some of these things. But it's been an absolute pleasure, Michael. Thank you so much.
I look forward to it, Mark. Take care.